So I have two questions. I had three before, now I reduced it to two. So the first one is in relation to the oppression of women and the material basis for why it cannot be resolved under the system. And you said that to abolish oppression of women, you need to abolish the private ownership of the means of production. And I understand you said that by referencing that oppression of women was, emerged with the division of society in classes and, with the development of private appropriation. So that's a fact. That's a fact. But right now, what we see right now with oppression of women is that it has taken all different kinds of forms. And it is very confusing for me to think about, how is it that private ownership of the means of production define that women must be oppressed? So I have a hard time wrapping my head around that.
Well, let's see, how many hours? No, this is a big question. That's what, look. The point is, if you want to talk about getting rid of the oppression of women, one of the things that you have to do is get rid of the whole family as it exists under capitalism and patriarchy as it exists. For example, how is private property, and I don't mean toothbrushes, but I mean wealth, how is that passed on from one generation to the next? It's not put into a common pool and then everybody draws from it, not under this system. It comes down through the family. So, if you were trying to get rid of a system with all these vast disparities of wealth and so on, you couldn't maintain a system where the wealth was privately owned and then passed down through the family, because then you would just be perpetuating the system of exploitation and the inequalities that go along with it. So you would have to you'd have to get rid of the whole thing where wealth and the family are completely bound together, and the wealth becomes social wealth, which goes to people according to their needs and is enlarged by people contributing according to their abilities. That's the goal you want to get to. So if you kept capitalism, if you're going to keep capitalism, then you would have to keep the family, the structure whereby things are consumed through the family. That, like the capitalists and the religious fundamentalists are always telling us that the family is the basic unit of capitalism, at least many of them are. And it's true, if you think about how do people live, there are a lot of variations now. Some people some people aren't married, some people don't have kids, some people have kids and are not married. They're all different kind of variations. But in one form or another, the main way that people actually live and survive is through some kind of unit where, and let's remember, you have to raise future generations. So you have to have, the kids can't do for themselves when they're 2 months or 2 years old or 8 years old. So you have to have some sort of, under this system, you have to have some sort of system, some sort of unit through which that happens. And that happens through some kind of a family unit. Not all of them are headed by males the way they used to be. There are all kinds of different relations. But still, the traditional family still is the dominant institution in terms of what largely exists, even with all these changes. And if you look at the world as a whole, that's definitely true. Because this is let's keep in mind, we sometimes look only through the prism of what's right around us or just this country. This is a highly parasitic country. Another way to say that is it's the very high end of the food chain. I saw recently a statistic that of all the people who work producing things, production workers in the world, 80% are in the third world, if you include China. So, a lot of what we ends up on our, plate or in our closet, in our houses, is made by people in all different parts of the world. And most of them are living in situations of the traditional patriarchal family. So sometimes you can get things skewed just looking at what exists right around you in this country. But even here, if there's still the unit where wealth and the ability to live comes through the family. And if you were going to keep the system of capitalism, you would have to keep that family. If you try to imagine passing on wealth through some other means under capitalism than doing it by inheritance and through the family. So then you got the question, well, can you have equality in the family under capitalism? If you're going to keep the family, can you get rid of the oppression of women in the family? Well, okay, first of all, again, there's the whole world. But then also within this country, so let's even just leave aside the rest of the world, but which we can't, but just for the moment. Even within this country, okay, in order to have, in a society which has the whole patriarchal tradition, and the patriarchy has been, as I said, woven into the fabric of this society. In order to have no inequality, even within the family, you'd have to mandate that from the government. First of all, you'd have to say everybody has to enter into some kind of relation that makes up a family. And because we have to have some way that we're going to have inheritance and all the rest of it. All right, then you'd have to have the government under capitalism if you're going to get rid of inequality within the family, where the women are not the ones who are doing most of the family work, even if they also have a job. You'd have to have the government come in and actually supervise that. And you'd have to what about all the people who aren't in families? Are you gonna make all of them get into families? This leads you to Handmaid's Tale type of stuff. The government also all of a sudden is mandating that everybody has to be in some kind of familial relationship, even if it's an updated version. You could have gay marriages and trans marriages and all kinds, but everybody has to be involved in some kind of family, and it all has to be equal. You can't have a division of labor that's unequal. Well, that means that you'd have to mean that everybody had a job that allowed them to be equal in the family. Because if some people had to work more than other people or at lower wages or so on, then one would become dependent on the other. Why do a lot of women, for example, stay in these relationships where they're battered all the time? Even raped by their husband. Let's just say battered all the time. Well, partly it's, they become convinced, because of the culture, they internalize their own oppression and become convinced that they must have done something wrong. But a lot of it is financial coercion. That they may have kids. How am I and my kids going to survive? This guy is a terrible, he's a terrible tyrant, but he brings in the money that we need to live on. If I break away from him, how am I going to live? So, and this is a very common problem. And so how would you eliminate the dependence where one person, is everybody going to have under capitalism the same job where they have the same finances so that they neither one would need to be dependent on the other financially? If you start going down the road with this, you can see how it's totally unworkable under capitalism. You have to get beyond all that sort of thing in order to have a situation where women would not be in the inferior position, given the whole way things have historically evolved. Now, you can get islands of things in the professions and so on, where women can carve out a position of not being necessarily, but they still, necessarily on the downside of an unequal relationship, or have no relationship at all with a man, can do that. But they're still living in a larger society and culture. I mean, look at the culture out here with regard to women. How can a woman really be equal and free of all the different expressions of oppression in a society like this one with this culture? Where, a tremendous amount of the pornography and strip club culture and all that is exactly in response to a section of women getting a certain amount of independence and position where they're not so dependent upon men. And so this is a way of reinstituting that, well, it's not completely abolished, but it's a way of concentrating that subordinate position in a very grotesque way. Well, you may not be able to, I saw a thing where a guy I read an article, a guy went to a strip club and he was talking about how for $20 he could get this woman to strip. And he said, that gives me a real good sense of power, that for $20 I can make this happen. Well, think about that. So this is what you're dealing with in the culture at large. So once you start really walking this through, you can see it's impossible. You'd have to transform the whole economy. You'd have to transform all the historically evolved relations between the genders with all the different variations to get rid of like I said, all vestiges of oppression. And you have to thoroughly transform the culture. And under capitalism, again, if you walk through it, just can't be done. You cannot. The reason it comes back ultimately to you were asking, why is it the question of the private ownership of the means of production? Why is it the mode of production? Why is it the economic system that's ultimately involved? Because of what I was walking through. There are many other manifestations and forms, very real forms of the oppression of women that are not reducible to economic relations. And you have to go after all that. That's why I say you got to transform the culture, you got to transform all these social relations. But if you don't have an economy that allows you to do those things, then you're not going to be able to do it no matter. You may be able to, like I said, fight and win certain reforms, but then they're only going to be partial and they're always going to be under attack. So you have to go after all these different dimensions of the oppression of all different people who are oppressed. But then you also have to transform the foundation of society, the economic system and the economic relations, in order to have the basis to really carry that through. As I said in the New Communism, you have to have a mode of production that doesn't prevent you from doing that, and which, on the contrary, actually fosters and facilitates that, makes it more possible to do that. So that's the relationship between all these different manifestations and the underlying economic system, or sometimes called the mode of production.